All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the 2021 Visitor Experience Conference. This is our 10th annual conference. We started back in 2012. There's about 40 people in a little classroom at the Academy of Natural Sciences for a half-day event called the Greater Philadelphia Visitor Services Symposium, which was a bit of a long-winded name, so we've shortened it over the years as we have grown. And we're so excited to have you all here. We're so excited to see you on our screens. We're so excited to see you in person next year when we're in Cleveland. The Visitor Experience Group is a group focused on providing professional development, encouraging collaboration between museum workers and institutions. And we've been at this, like I said, for the last 9 or 10 years. And we are now officially a nonprofit. And we are currently on the search for board members, which I will talk to you a little bit more about in just a moment. But in the meantime, I thought it might be nice to introduce everybody. So to start, my name is Pat Whitwer. I am one of the vice presidents and the marketing and communications chair for VEX. I went to that first meeting in Philly back in 2012 and then joined the following year the planning committee, which has now become the board. In my day job, I am a instructor at the University of the Arts in their Museum Studies program, along with 2 of my other colleagues who are here, and I'll throw it to one of them now. So Nicole.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nicole Crome. I am the president of the VEX group. I am thrilled to see everybody here. I'm really excited for an engaging afternoon and look forward to seeing all of you in the different sessions. Kyle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Cantarera. I'm a VP with the VEX group, as well as the hospitality chair. It's great to see everyone. My day job is I'm the guest experience manager at Mount Cuba Center, which is a small public garden in northern Delaware. I'll bounce it to Cindy next.
Hi, I'm Cindy Helmstetter. I joined my day job is a visitor engagement manager at the Museum of the American Revolution, and I also chair the events committee. So hopefully we'll see you at 7:15 tonight.
And now we'll throw it to Mandy, our newest board member.
Hi, I'm Mandy Magnuson-Holm. And like Patrick said, I've been a board member for about 5 minutes. Apologies to those of you who heard that joke yesterday. I'm currently between day jobs, although I should hopefully be transitioning into a position at the Music of Asian America Research Center. And I think I'm currently just a board member at large.
All right, so that is our board as it stands now. We did have a few more folks when we started, and we had a few more folks when we started this year. But as it happened, some people had a lot of career changes recently, and so we are now a little bit smaller than we'd like to be. So we are definitely looking for more folks to join the board. We have open positions as chair of the programming committee, audience engagement, and the development committee, which would do membership and sponsorships. We have those committees as well as committee roles for the marketing, events, and operations, and the programming committee. We have our ambassador program where we have folks around the country who represent VEX locally and host events and things like that, several of whom you will see throughout the day today. And we would love to have you join us. So if you would like to help out, if you're interested in doing what we do, you can reach out to any of us throughout the day. You can email us at info@visitorexperience.
Pat, you're muted. Sorry.
Somebody mute me.
Sorry. It's probably
No worries.
admitting people.
So as I was saying, you can reach out to us at info@visitorexperience.group, or you could reach out to me on Twitter @VexGroup, and I'm happy to talk to you more about joining the team. Now, this room that we are in right now, this Zoom room, we will have our keynote starting in just a couple of minutes. And then after that, this will be open all day as the hallway. So you can come in here, there will be a PowerPoint on the screen with just general information, most of the stuff that I'm talking about right now. And either Mandy or I will be here to answer any questions you may have. And we'll also have breakout rooms available for you if you want to have a side conversation, follow up with somebody after a session, or for any other reason. doing the best we can to recreate that conference atmosphere here online. Throughout the year, we do other things besides the conference. We have our VEX Ed webinar series, and we'll be announcing the next one, which we're expecting to be about staff engagement in the next couple of weeks or so. So keep an eye out for that. If you are, like me, a fan of museum Twitter and you want to talk about your experience today, we just ask that you use the hashtag VEX21, VEX21, when talking about the conference. Then you may have noticed we're all about t-shirts here. We had our dry t-shirt contest last night, and you could head over to Instagram to see the winning t-shirt design, which was amazing. But we also now have VEX t-shirts like this one that is a total ripoff of the Reading Rainbow logo. And Jurassic Park inspired one are always popular, other duties as assigned. And as we prepare to party at the Rock Hall next year in Cleveland, our Ramones inspired culture punk shirt. You can find those and next year's conference shirt at bonfire.com/store/VEX group. We are currently participating in Sweattober with the National EMP Network, which is a campaign to end unpaid internships. The National EMP Network is doing a lot of amazing things, and this is just one of them. So I highly recommend checking out their website, learning a little bit more from them. And I do believe you'll see one of their presidents tonight at BattleDecks, which reminds me, you should join us for BattleDecks tonight at 7:15. For those of you who have gone to SMA or ASLH, you may be familiar with this. It's improv interpretation. And tonight's theme is that I've made up 7 fake museums, and you have to interpret these items as though they were in the collection of this fake museum. So it should be a lot of fun. The winner of BattleDecks gets free admission to next year's conference. Every single event, workshop, session, all for free. And with that, we'd like to invite you to join us next year for the 2022 Visitor Experience Conference in Cleveland. We'll be hosting the conference itself at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and we're going to kick things off with the opening night party at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that should be a lot of fun. So with all of that, we're very excited to have you here. We want to thank you for being here. And we also want to thank our keynote presenters, Chris Taylor and Cinnamon Catlin-Legutko. They are here today. They are co-editors of the Inclusive Museum Leader, and they have also done so many more amazing things. But I will turn it over to them and let them introduce themselves with a reminder, set it to speaker view, and enjoy today's content. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pat, for all of that. I'm becoming acquainted with VEX, and I really like the vibe. So this is nice, and this is nice to be here. My name is Chris Taylor. I'm currently the Chief Inclusion Officer for the state of Minnesota. Been doing that for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I spent 14 years at the Minnesota Historical Society. And my journey to kind of DEI work was, I don't know if there is a typical journey, but mine started in community engagement. And I was doing what we called at the museum at that time, diversity outreach. I was working with Minneapolis and St. Paul Public Schools, which is where the preponderance of our diversity in our school systems were students on American Indian reservations, these types of things. And so kind of was reading a lot about diversity in museums and equity, and just started to see opportunities to really create change. And just the focus that I had started to shift more towards looking at organizations and organization systems, and looking at museums as kind of the constant through all of the work that we do. And when we talk about diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion work, it really isn't just about shifting the perception of particular communities about the museum or them feeling included in our work. Those are really important things, but I also think it's about kind of rooting out the systemic kind of isms that we see as our default operating practices in museums, and really focusing there and seeing what we can do to shift to shift how we operate, or to shift just really the core identity of what museums are, right? And so that really started to get me to think about DEI from a strategic standpoint, from an organizational change standpoint, and that really became a passion. I just defended my dissertation and earned a doctorate in organization development. My research focused on how white normativity in museums impacts museum professionals of color. It was a fascinating study, and I really learned a lot. And I think there's a lot that we need to do. And so, you know, as I look at the work of museums and I look at kind of the landscape of equity work, we're moving in the right direction. It feels that way. It really does. So I'm happy to be here with you today. I'm also happy to introduce Cinnamon, who was a co-editor with me on The Inclusive Museum Leader, and really was the driving force behind the book. She's fantastic if you've not met her before. And so I'll have Cinnamon kind of introduce herself and how she came to this work.
Thank you. It's so great to be with all of you, and it's a true honor. Again, my name is Cinnamon Catlin-Legutko. Currently, I'm the director of the Illinois State Museum, and I'm presently located in Springfield, Illinois, which is the ancestral homeland of Kickapoo, Kaskaskia, Peoria nations. And Illinois, as we know it today, is also the home of more than 100,000 Indigenous people. So I always want to acknowledge the folks who have called this place home much longer than I have before I get rolling in my conversation. I've been with Illinois State Museum just over 2 years now. I'm one of those lucky people who started a brand new job right before COVID hit. So I'm still getting my feet underneath me. But prior to that, for 10 years, I was the president and CEO of the Abbey Museum in Bar Harbor, Maine. I'm originally from the Midwest, so this is a return back to my home. But my time at the Abbey was beyond my imagination or my dreams in terms of how it transformed my leadership, my work, and what I'll be talking about with all of you today with my partner Chris in this work. The Abbey Museum is a museum, if you're not familiar, focused on the lives, the experiences, the creativity of Wabanaki people. The Wabanaki homeland is Maine, northern New England, up into Canada, Brunswick, New Brunswick, and the Maritimes. So a very large part of the world that we worked with, and the museum itself is situated on Mount Desert Island in a highly tourist area where Acadia National Park is. So in that place, we made a significant change in 2012 and committed to decolonizing museum practices. So it's in that journey that I connected with Chris, and he worked with us there. And from those experiences, we grew in our learning and really began to, at least me personally, sink into what it means to be an inclusive leader. Before that, I worked at a couple other historic locations, and I'm about in my 25th year in museum work. And so for me, inclusion and what we write about and talk about in the book is almost newer for me than you'd think. I'm very honest about the fact that my work of being aware and being focused on removing harm and recognizing oppression where it exists in museum spaces especially has really been about a 12-year journey at this point, even less. It's new for me, and I'm constantly learning, and I feel a commitment to help others get on their journey, and that's why I'm in this conversation today as well. And then my decision to join the Illinois State Museum was to take all that I had learned and scale up. See what this looks like in a state system, see what this can do in the Midwest, where you have severe and painful erasure of Indigenous people because of forced removal, as well as ongoing systems that are in place that deny visibility for Indigenous people. And so, as you can imagine, last year, 2020, was an intense year for all of us. Many years of thinking about this work, many years of wondering why museums aren't making changes to be more inclusive, why leadership isn't leading the way, lots of questions. And then we head into 2020 and the murder of George Floyd in May of that year was a profound experience for all of us. But for me especially, it was that moment where I knew that enough was enough and we needed to do what we could in these spaces of inclusion to help others and what could be done. And so this book was born. So I'll just transition a little bit to talk about the development of the book, because I know people are always very interested in that. And then we'll head into a meatier conversation about what it means to be an inclusive museum leader. So I mentioned that, May of last year was a significant year, or significant moment rather. I was also in this place on the board at the time of the American Alliance of Museums, and being part of the work they were doing to work with boards, working with museums to move toward and operate within a diversity inclusion framework, and hearing often that leaders of institutions were grappling with what this meant for them, what they needed to do, and were really hungry for resources on how to transform their leadership style. And we also write about this in the book, especially in the preface, that we were also, Chris and I collectively here, we're noticing that leaders weren't showing up in rooms for training. We weren't seeing them show up in places like Mass Action, where the field was making a commitment around social action and creating toolkits for change around social justice and other mechanisms. We weren't seeing the leaders show up. And then we were seeing statements, as you will have witnessed as well, statements from museums in solidarity with Black Lives Matter and anti-racist movements over the course of last year, and no action to back that up, very little action. So where were these disconnects happening, and why weren't leaders practicing vulnerability? What did they need to be doing? So we thought we could help out. And so that's what drove me to this point in time last year to take on this book. And I had that great moment where I could sit quietly and ask myself, who do I want to do this with? Who do I want to work on this with? And of course, the first name was Chris Taylor, because of the work we had done together at the Abbey Museum, the work I had seen him do at the Minnesota Historical Society, as well as through Mass Action, Museum as Sites for Social Action, and then all the ways in which you'll hear him share his knowledge today. He was my first pick, and I am still counting myself quite lucky that he said yes to this adventure. And so I just want to turn it back to Chris as well to see, what you might comment on about your reasons for joining this project in the way that you did and what we hope to do. Chris, are you there still? Did we lose you? There you are. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Wouldn't be a 2021 meeting without somebody being on mute and just talking away, right? So when Cinnamon approached me to write the book, I was in the middle of a lot, and it was such an opportunity to really kind of amplify a lot of voices that Cinnamon and I had heard over the course of our careers, but it came at this point in time where, like, Cinnamon was talking about with the murder of George Floyd, and I live in the Twin Cities, right? And so it was like the epicenter of all of this that was going on. And what I started to notice in people who were not Black in my circle, this kind of realization about systemic issues that on a level that I'd not seen before, right? And kind of this door opening to really start to help folks understand how systems of oppression work, and that our current kind of default norms in society aren't equitable, nor did they happen kind of by accident, right? And thinking about how we've adopted a lot of these practices as default. And even within museums, a lot of the things that we refer to as best practices are paternalistic or antagonistic or elitist, like these types of things, right? And so the opportunity to really kind of write a book about inclusive leadership and, you know, the struggle that the museum field has gone through because of the pandemic and because of a lot, it almost is an opportunity, or maybe the closest we would get to kind of hit the restart button and really start to think about how we reinvent museums to be these institutions that our stated values can articulate very well, but our lived values often don't align with those stated values. And so it was great timing. You know, it was an opportunity, like I said, to reach out to a number of incredibly brilliant people who have deep experience with doing equity work, social justice work from a museum setting, and ask them to contribute their voice, right? And so while, you know, it was nice to put the project together, it was a learning opportunity for me as well as we were editing chapters and these types of things. And so it's just been an incredible project. And, you know, hopefully there'll be things in there that speak to you. We tried to be very intentional about including many different perspectives from many different levels of museum organizations and all kinds of different things. And so we also wanted to have some practical opportunities in there. So there are activities and things of that nature where you can increase your self-awareness or your critical reflective practice, or these types of things that we really feel are important for inclusive leaders. So it was just a great opportunity, you know, and I think, you know, as we move into kind of just more discussion right now, Cinnamon and I have some questions that, you know, we're going to kind of bounce back and forth with each other, but we're also kind of looking at keeping an eye on the chat to see what questions are coming up there. We will have time for sure for Q&A, but if you hear something that sparks a question for you, please just put it in the chat and we'll make sure that we address it either when we're done kind of with our questions, or you may come up with a better question than we did, and maybe we want to skip to address that in the moment. So, so kind of thinking about, you know, one of the things I really appreciate about Cinnamon is she is so authentic in her leadership style, including being very aware of and vulnerable when it comes to her blind spots, right? And, you know, in my experience, leaders often feel as though they need to have all the answers, right? Or at least appear to have all the answers. And I found this can often hinder the type of systemic change that we need to really create inclusive organizations. So, Simon, I'm wondering if there's anything that you can share from your experience, you know, as it relates to your practice of being vulnerable or authentic, or, you know, kind of recognizing and understanding your blind spots, that you'd be willing to share with us about that kind of self-awareness that you've developed over your career.
Absolutely. And you've hit on one of the things that the two of us really believe is essential for inclusive leadership is awareness. And I don't know that all of us are born with it. I feel like, though, at an early age, I was always hyper aware of how I show up in a room. And it's probably because I always want to be in charge of that room. It's just how I entered the world. And to become self-aware of that helps you evolve as a leader. And unfortunately, if you're not putting yourself through regular training, putting yourself through personal development, thinking about how you show up with the power that you hold as a leader and the authority that you hold as a leader, you can develop really significant blind spots. And I have plenty of them. It's taken me a while to learn when they are blind spots, and you do that through all kinds of training, of course, understanding yourself through unconscious bias training, understanding yourself through anti-racism training. All of those courses of work are essential, and then a regular schedule of maintenance and checking in to make sure you're still on track helps me identify my blind spots. But very simply, it can be as easy as jotting them down on a Post-it note, keeping them next to your computer, and look at those often and say, okay, why is that a blind spot? Is that showing up for me a lot? Why am I not navigating that well? And what do I need to do? And I'm presently working through some of them around state government and processes. And I know in my heart that those processes are incredibly oppressive and colonizing for Indigenous people, but I can't see what to move out of the way. Like, those are my blind spots right now I'm really struggling with. And just to practice vulnerability, I wanted to share that, but that's the kind of work of it. And then to help you navigate, it depends on your learning style. Of course, formal education of any kind helps. But also, I know that I'm a peer learner. I love learning with my peers and hearing how they've applied skills, how they've applied themselves in situations. And I'm very practical in my approach. If I can see something manifest in a day-to-day world, I can then pull it back and learn that process. It's that awareness of what kind of learner I am, which has been helpful. And so for me in my journey, I'm now working with an accountability partner to help me see those blind spots. I also have, honestly, 2 different groups of museum professionals I work with to help me with my leadership journey, and in return help them figure out where we are in our cycle and how we can reduce harm and create a sense of belonging in our workplaces. So that's important as a leader to do that work, sure. But I also think it's as important to be responsive to how your colleagues in the workplace are working on their blind spots, or when they're wanting to really make systemic change. And so we talk a lot, you hear this a lot in the work of inclusion, that there are equity teams at museums, there's groups of folks really facilitating change, and sometimes they're in lockstep with leadership, sometimes they're not, and you have tensions that develop. But I would just say that, whatever you can do to empower staff in your institutions to engage in this work, all the better, because they're going to help you see those blind spots. They're going to see their own blind spots, hopefully, and then you can help them with their momentum, right? You can use your power to fund their momentum through the budget, through initiatives. You can also empower folks to really solicit and receive feedback. That's a tough cycle to maneuver. And it's one of my deep weaknesses, is the ability to take feedback, but I work on it all the time, and I have to ask the questions. But I also have to empower my colleagues to feel like they can ask the questions and offer feedback. And that's a problem in a lot of places where you've got C-suite structures and power differentials. People don't feel like they can engage in those conversations. So it's also up to me to really make sure I can build that space for others in that environment. So that's just a few ways of thinking about blind spots. And I always, of course, like to talk about this with Chris. We do talk about this a lot. And I'd love for everyone to hear from his perspective when he's working with top leadership. How do you promote the importance of self-awareness? It's kind of that managing up, managing crossways. If someone's really got a blind spot and you are ready to alert them, how do you do that?
Yeah, delicately, right? Because you don't want people to shut down, but I think you do have to talk to leaders from a space of that honesty, right? And if you're noticing a blind spot, it's not just kind of saying like, hey, you have a blind spot here, I'm pointing it out, but also coaching them on how they might address that, right? And I think what I like to really talk about is lived experience, right? And so when we talk about diversity writ large, right? What we're talking about is kind of a variety of experiences, different ways that we've moved through the world, different lessons that we've learned as a result of that. And leaders have their experiences, their life kind of experiences that they bring to their leadership lens, right? So regardless of what training they've gone through to get to their positions, they're constantly bringing their self or their lens or their lived experience to shape how they approach problem solving and all of these different types of things. And when we're talking about inclusive leadership, we're really trying to get leaders to understand that that is magnified 1,000 times with their sphere of influence, right? So when you have somebody who is a CEO, a director, or top leadership, or a board chair, or whatever, they're calling the shots based on their experience, and that is impacting the whole institution, right? And so the need for them to explore their blind spots and the need for them to understand what that looks like becomes that much more important, right? And so we talk about self-awareness and we talk about reflecting. And so it might be things, and you can find some of this stuff in the book, having them just reflect on who kind of is in their inner circle, right? Because we know that there are in groups and out groups in museums, and those people in the in groups, really any organization, but we'll focus on museums here. The people in the in groups accrue benefits at a way easier rate, a way faster rate than those people in the out groups, right? And so if I'm most comfortable with the people who look like me, have had a similar experience to me, that's who's going to be in my in group, and that's who's going to continue to have more access to information, accrue better benefits through promotional type situations or choice kind of job assignments, these types of things, right? And so being very intentional about understanding who's in my in group, but cultivating relationships with people who are different than me in various ways as a goal, and being intentional about that. Or it might be that you have relationships, but you just need to continue to cultivate them so that they're at a level where you can have conversations where these folks are helping you understand your blind spots. Well, why did you make that decision? This is how I see the problem. Like being able to have these conversations where now all of a sudden that kind of horizon or the landscape in a leader's mind is starting to be broadened to consider different criteria, different pieces of information, and those types of things. And I think too, one thing I like to point out to leaders about awareness is there's likely people in the organization who are closer to some of these issues that we're trying to address that may have better answers than they do. And that's hard to hear. When you're the leader, you want to, like we were just talking about with sentiment, you want to have the answers, you want to have the best answers. And oftentimes in our culture, it looks weak as a leader to kind of be more collaborative in your decision making or your solution generation, problem solving type stuff. But that's really where, if you think about it, right? So visitor experiences, when we're talking about wanting to create a more welcoming space for different audiences in our museums, who is going to have a better sense of what some of those issues are and some of those potential solutions would be than those people who are engaging with visitors on a daily basis continually, right? And they hear the complaints and they see the problems, and they that's not typically what a leader's role is, right, in a museum. And so how do we bring those folks into the conversation so that we can understand that, hey, that might not be our strength, but in collaboration with my strategic understanding of the institution as a leader, my ability to allocate resources, you know, what I do best as a leader, being collaborative in that space can really go a long way to solving these issues that we're trying to solve. And so I think, trying to highlight those types of examples and trying to help a leader understand that they're going to build more trust with people when they're vulnerable and authentic, right? And you can lead by command and control, or you can lead by people giving you their trust. And it's two different things. And I think when you get to that point where people are willingly allowing you to lead them because they trust you, that's really where we're going to get to a place where we're ready to take some risks and really create some change, right? And thinking about kind of systemic change, I'll kind of pose this question to Cinnamon. We're talking about change that's deep and really long term, and change is often really hard, and sometimes we've seen in museums kind of some surface level changes that give the impression that we're moving in the right direction, but really don't address the underlying values and behaviors that support the status quo. How would you describe the type of systemic change that needs to happen for museums to truly become inclusive spaces?
I think about it in different ways based on the day, but in some, the kind of change that needs to happen is at the core of museum work. We need to be rethinking why we do this work. Who do we do it for? We need to remember the history of museum practice. Wherever we work, we're built on a template that repeats itself over and over again, that privileges knowledge and tells audiences what's important. Right? So everything that's been left out of our narratives has been deemed not important because we didn't put it in a museum. So when you think about the structures of museums, and if they're persisting in that model over and over again, they have to go right to the core of their history and begin to reveal their institutional history. Maybe today they are the most inclusive looking museum you ever did see, and people are learning from them. But 100 years ago, they were the most oppressive, harmful institution on the planet, and they never talk about it, right? They have to talk about that in the present because that legacy is what they're living off of. So that questioning of the whole existence has to be part of the conversation to begin to address systemic change. And then you have to become fluent in the language. You have to start getting comfortable. A lot of our colleagues have written about how you don't need to get hung up on the terminology. I agree. But I also have been in a workplace where the terminology was absent and no one can talk about the problem, right? So how do we become fluent? And that's how I'm starting to look at it more, is learning how to read the room, as well as the communities you're working with, as well as what's happening writ large, and bringing that with your fluency into the workplace, into the museum space to make change. But it also requires, and I've already alluded to this in terms of my own journey, but for the institution, it requires a regular practice of training. It has taken generations for an institution to operate in the way it has, and it will take generations to decode the harm. And that takes daily work. Same goes for the individual. You've lived a lifetime coded by messages, especially if you're a white person in the US, especially, you've been coded in a certain way, and it's going to take a lifetime to decode that. And that's daily work. Just like you're trying to be fluent, it's daily work. And at the Abbey, when I was there, that was so critical. And I believe it still, and it's how we've been beginning our work at the Illinois State Museum, is through training. But it has to be more than just, oh, this team gets a lot of training because they do education and they're doing this public interface. It has to be the whole organization, including board members engaged in that training, including volunteers, whether they interface with the public or not. They really need to understand the work that's being asked of them. And then you begin to create a culture of learning, right? It's just the way we do our work. We do the work through learning. And then you take the time. I think one of the really critical things we did at the Abbey, and I'm gearing up for it now at the Illinois State Museum, is that we do these cycles of planning, through strategic planning or whatever frame you use for patterns of planning. we have to, if we're wanting to create systemic change, we have to build in time to learn before we can actually plan. So I call it planning for the planning. And that was a critical thing we did at the Abbeys. We spent 2 years planning for the transformative strategic plan we did, which took another year to imagine and create through lots of conversations, as you can guess. Certainly some people had to come off the board and make change. I'm not going to say that didn't happen, but we could gather the people who wanted to be in that culture of learning and make the change with us. And that's what it took. It has to be at all levels for systemic change. And it has to have a clear understanding of your institutional history and the harm that it's caused. Whether you did it or not, doesn't matter. You're sitting in that seat of power. Therefore, you've inherited the privileges of that power that someone before you built. And it might have been quite harmful the way they built it. And the last thing I'll say, and I learned this one, and it's really been interesting trying to get others to agree with me on this one in state government. This is one of my blind spots I'm working on. You have to document the change that's afoot and be transparent and talk about it a lot. Obviously, when you're talking to the media, it's hard, especially when there's an election year coming up in our state, and I work for the state, right? I'm trying to navigate that and what words do I use? But nevertheless, I must be transparent in the work that we're doing. Talk about the change that's happening so that we can learn from others, so that we can invite people in, so that folks can check us and hold us accountable if we're not doing it. Someone's got to hold you accountable, and they don't know what you're up to unless you tell them. So I think it's those 3 things for me right now that I've been focusing on, is that fluency, it's the institutional history and understanding its ramifications for today, and then being uber transparent and really documenting it and talking about it a lot. If anything, talking about it a lot so you can stabilize the change, which feels like an oxymoron, but makes the change a norm. That was a word I tried earlier today with a colleague about stabilizing the change, and I liked it. I feel like that's the work I'm up to right now. It's like, just accept it. I'll give you everything you need. Just accept that the change is ongoing, and we'll get far. So really, that's the answer for me around my commitment to systemic change. And I've alluded to the power of boards. And it is really a conundrum for a lot of my friends and colleagues. And I really want to talk to Chris about this too, because I think he'll have some interesting answers for you. When we think about the power of boards, if boards were to signal more that they want inclusive leaders, we don't always see that. We don't always see them express that in job descriptions. We don't always see that in the firms they choose for executive searches. And we don't always see that in the way they set them up for success. But if they were to signal that they wanted inclusive leaders, how would that impact behavior of not only current leaders, aspiring leaders, and emerging leaders as well? How would that create systemic change?
Yeah, so boards play a big role in this, and I'm also going to try to kind of wrap in Deirdre's question from the chat in here as well. So a more direct answer to your question, like, boards kind of set the standards, right? So CEOs, presidents, directors are responsive to the boards. Boards set strategic vision for museums and really kind of are stewarding the accountability for museums. So if boards say, this is what we want to see, or we want a director who is a person of color, LGBTQ community member, person with a disability, whatever that might be, I think the likelihood that it's going to happen is going to be much higher, right? And if boards are saying, these are the types of communities that we're going to hold you responsible for increasing your visibility in, increasing your relationships with, your engagement, your support of all of these things, you know, that becomes the measure by which we're held accountable, right? And I think that, you know, in terms of stewarding the type of systemic change we want to see, I think that would go a long ways. What I've tended to see, though, is that kind of traditional mentality of museums, that's often, the board is where that's often held the tightest, right? And we're supposed to be a board and we're elite. And I think, we get people on boards because of their either financial resources or their visibility in the community, and we're really not designing the makeup of our boards to be aligned with what we're saying we want to do as museums, right? So if we were to bring in board members who are members of the communities that we wanted to serve, or people who are critical of how we are serving particular communities, and invite them to be a part of that change, right? That could be a potential way to kind of to do that, right? Now that's different, I think, for different museums and sizes of museums, and how reliant museums are on boards for bringing in, financial support. But I would also say there's a little bit of a myth in that, because there's money in some of these communities as well, right? There's money in all of these communities. It's just a matter of, are you something that they see worthy of giving that money to, right? So I think that kind of myth of economic issues isn't always the same. What I would say about getting boards, so there's the transition of the board to being that makeup of folks who either have lived experience or have experience doing equity work, inclusion work, these types of things that can help to build that into the strategy. I also think too, there's a business case argument to be made. And it really took me a long time to get comfortable with making this argument about the bottom line impact of DEI work, because we should be doing it just because we should be doing it. It's our responsibility as institutions. But when you think about what is the board responsible for, they're responsible for the fiscal health of the institution, and you need to speak to them from that perspective, right? So what are we going to gain? Are we going to gain new members, new donors? Are we going to be able to increase revenues, these types of things? And, what is that change that needs to happen to be able to do that? I've said when I was doing consulting work to boards, like, if you're not thinking about the demographic makeup of your community 10, 15, 20 years from now, you're not being a good steward of this museum, because you need to start that change now to be able to engage those folks that are going to be the predominant communities that you're relying on in the future, right? And so, I've had some success making arguments from a business case standpoint, because that's a language that boards, understand. And once that mind is made up, though, I think boards could really accelerate the change that we want to see. Cinnamon, real quick, do you want to do the next round of questions, or do we want to start to address some of these questions that are in the chat box? Because I'm seeing that there's a few in there, and I know we only got about 18 minutes left.
Well, I think we could talk a little bit about, personal growth, because I just kind of led into it with the answer to this question, and I'm happy to build on that. And then we'll see where we're at, because I think personal growth is this third, the third part of the stool we want people to be mindful of.
100%. So let me ask the question. So, having known you for quite a while now, one thing that I always have appreciated is that you see yourself on this continuous journey, right? And even the work that you've done with, decolonization in the field and everything else, it's not the destination, that's part of the journey, right? Mm-hmm. So what have been some of the most challenging points along your journey? And what have you learned that have made you a more inclusive leader as you've gone about that journey?
Absolutely. I've learned so much, and my list is long of those moments where you realize you know nothing. And it's important to document those, like, oh my gosh, I thought I understood how things work around this and I know nothing. And so for me, one of the early ones was my undergraduate and graduate work is in anthropology. I was trained as a traditional anthropologist with applications in museum spaces. And I worked in historic places before I worked in a more anthropologically focused museum, which was the Abbey. Turns out that for Indigenous people, it's history, not anthropology. So that realization that my anthropological approaches to doing the work of museum practice with Indigenous people was really harmful, and everything I had learned had to be unlearned. Everything I had paid for had to be unlearned. And that was brutal, right? It's important to understand those frames because you can start to understand change patterns, right? The things you need to do. And modern anthropology is much more varied than the way that I was trained. So I will say that for sure. But I was in grad school in the early 90s when traditional methods were still the norm. And really making that shift to the work of decolonization, the work of Indigenous collaboration is rooted in history. It's a people's history. So that unlearning reminded me that I had to constantly unlearn, to learn, right? To really question and rethink, why do I know that? And take it further. And then of course, there are moments where you're in a board meeting or you're in a training and you realize you have weaknesses or you didn't understand what was going on when you really thought you did. Something went off the rails and you've got to question what happened. Those can all be those moments of challenge. You can give up and say next day, tomorrow morning, it'll be a new day, or you can use it as data. I use it as data, right? It's all data points for me. It's in my mind. What can I do with this information? What part did I have in that moment? And what do I need to do to make change? And then of course, in the trainings that you go through, I think the deeper you get, the more challenging those moments are. By the time I had left the Abbey, one of the last big trainings I did was a 4-day intensive anti-racism class with my colleagues at the museum. All of us did it together. And I had to expose myself in ways that I never thought I could or would. I mean, it was a extreme exercise in vulnerability that was emotional and triggering. And I had to figure out what to do with that. And to be frank, it contributed to why I needed to find my next destination, right? Once you lay yourself bare, it's not the same the next day. And if I'm going to continue my journey of learning, I need to continue through the next classroom, if that helps. So there are many, many, many challenges. And I'm recognizing the time as well. And we have so many interesting questions popping up. Chris, how do you want to navigate this next 15 minutes? I'll let you lead us. That sounds good.
I'm seeing dialogue in the chat group, so that's fantastic. I'm trying to look for, any questions that you all may have. You could pop those in the chat. You could also unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. But I do think the dialogue part of this is really important, and so any questions that you all may have or want to pose to myself or the collective sentiment or the collective wisdom of this group, right?
Can I just raised my hand, but I don't know, can we just leap in?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Hi, I'm Linda. I'm from the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. I just put a comment in the chat, but just one thing, I run education here, I'm an educator. One thing I had really noticed at the beginning of all this, and that sort of knee-jerk reaction, oh my God, we have to do something, is everyone put out these lists of articles and important books to read, but they were all really like graduate level work. And a vast number of our staff are either maybe still in college or haven't gone to college at all, or English is not their first language. And and they're invited into these discussions where they don't feel confident and they don't say 2 words. And so I was wondering if there are good articles, good books, or a resource list around DEAI issues that are not written at a graduate level that anyone can recommend, because that was a real challenge.
That's a great question. I'm trying to remember the name of my favorite book. Oh yes, this book is Anti-Racist by Tiffany Jewell. I have found to be incredibly helpful. In fact, I keep it next to my office desk at work. It's a great one for me to flip open and prioritize the bigger issues. It's a modest sized book. It's highly affordable. If you wanted to buy it for everybody, it's a great thing to work with. I think you'll find it accessible. Certainly English as a second language is an important thing to tend to, right? So I'm not sure about the translation. So I would also look at that and prioritize that for your group. What are some of the things you use, Chris? I mean, you're really reaching across many, many dimensions of folks at work.
Yeah, so I put a couple of them in the chat. There's a book by Jana Freeman about unconscious bias. It's a quick read. She's got some activities in there. Actually, one we borrowed for our book. But it's really accessible. There's one called "Why Can't We Talk About That at Work" by Mary Frances Winters. It's another great book. It's about how our identities aren't just like, it's not like we just shed our identities when we walk into work. And so when things are happening in the world that impact us, being able to have kind of bold and inclusive conversations about these in the workplace is really helpful to us. There is a book that's kind of in between a real easy read and a real academic. It's called the Diversity at Work, the Practice of Inclusion. It's edited by Bernardo Ferdman and Barbara Dean. And I actually keep a copy at work and I keep a copy at home because there are just so many different chapters in there that are really helpful for me. And so that's a book that I lean on quite a bit. So yeah, those would be some that I think I would suggest for that. Other questions that folks may have or reactions, right? Please feel free to share your knowledge with us as well.
Well, and maybe while we're waiting, because I know there's a lot that's churning and y'all are really thinking it through, and I appreciate that. Let me just ask you my last question and see if something comes up for people too. Because when we have those rough moments, hopefully I've shown you some of my growing edges today. But when those happen, how would you like to see leaders own that moment? What can they say when their growing edge starts to show and things feel sharp and uncomfortable? And it's not even for leaders, it's really for any of us. Like, what can we say when we have stepped in it and can't figure our way forward and need to acknowledge?
Yeah, I think so. We all make mistakes. I have made and continue to make mistakes in situations all the time. And I think part of it is about how you own it, right? And understanding that our intent and our impact are often two different things, right? And oftentimes when we apologize based on that, right? And we say something like, "I'm sorry, but I didn't really mean it that way." And that's not really an apology, right? What you're essentially saying is like, "Hey, you took that the wrong way and you're coming at me because you interpreted that wrong." What really matters is how that person feels based on what you've just done or said or whatever. And so something like, "Hey, I'm really sorry. Can you help me understand what I did?" Right? Or can we have a conversation about that so I can learn from that and move forward with that knowledge and hopefully be better in the future, right? And so I think some of it is how we own own some of those mistakes, right? And I think that's a sign of vulnerability, and just saying like, I didn't know, but I'm learning and I'm willing to learn, and I'm curious, and I just am truly sorry. I'm not trying to be ignorant, or I'm not trying to be whatever, but I want to learn in this situation, right? I think one other thing that I would suggest is really understanding where you have those relationships where you can really have conversations and you can get constructive criticism from people that you trust, right? And so we hear criticism from people that we trust way different than we hear criticism from people who either we've just met or whatever. And having those relationships where somebody can say, wow, and you're like, well, what? And they're like, I can't believe you just said that, or I can't believe you just did that, and here's why. And I know that that's not how you are, but those actions are such and such, right? Those kinds of relationships are invaluable as we talk about exploring our blind spots and learning more about ourselves, but also learning in different behaviors as we're, there's the intercultural development inventory, which is an assessment of your level of intercultural competence, right? Or your ability to work across cultural difference. And there's a continuum that it measures you on or whatever, and I won't go too deep into that, but part of what it is it's about being curious, and it's about being empathetic, and it's about understanding that differences is important and that we don't know everything, right? But what we're trying to do is get to a point where we can shift our behaviors to be more inviting of people who are culturally different than us to engage or whatever. We become that bridge, right? But it's about behaviors. And so when we have behaviors that hurt other people or aren't appropriate or whatever, learning in that moment can help us do something different the next time, right? And that's really where that concrete kind of tangible change starts to happen, is when we start to behave differently in a situation where in the past maybe we've offended somebody or hurt somebody or whatever. So that's what I would say about that. And just really, how you own it, but then have those relationships with people around you that can be really honest, and you can feel good about their honesty and understand like, okay, these are some areas where I can focus and I can get better and keep doing my own work. That is easier said than done. Let me just put that out there. Like, I'm sitting here talking like, hey, just do this or whatever. That is hard work, and it doesn't feel comfortable ever. But when you can lean into that, you can really, really make some good progress on your journey.
I just wanted to comment on what Mandy said too, that, remembering that it's a kindness, and truly that is the way forward. I always say feedback is a gift. And I learned that from folks just like Chris, that if you can see it as a gift, because think about the person who's giving it, they're really having to take a step outside of themselves, and they're trying to put a bow on it to make it palatable, right? So accept it as the gift that it is and hold it. And if you're struck by it, be in awe of it and take a moment and thank them, right? That's so critical. And then just with the few minutes we have left too, we do have a question about accountability partners. I'm not sure if I talk about that in the book. That's a great question. I don't think I had a space for that, but for me, I worked with a mutual friend of ours, Dina Bailey, who helps me a lot of times figure out where the heck I am on my journey, as well as others. And she's actually working with us at the Illinois State Museum now. And she was kind of diagnosing for me one day, like where I am, what do I need to do? And then other conversations like with Chris and more showed me examples, and where I arrived at is, I'm doing the studies, I'm doing the trainings, but I need someone to probe me, to watch me, to think about me. And so I have monthly calls with a colleague friend who we do just that. We just had it on last Friday and it was invigorating. And I trust her. I don't, I would think that would be essential, as I trust that when she says these things to me, it is coming from love and enthusiasm and belief in what I need to do. But I searched for a couple months. I sent out texts to people. I was looking for folks that maybe I didn't know, and it ended up being someone I did know. And that was my freight that I needed. And we've been doing it for 2 years now, maybe more actually, these monthly calls. And it's some of my most favorite time, Friday morning at 8 a.m. to sit down and look at the warts, and we do it together. So I think any of us has the ability to do that. All right. Oh, and then just to wrap up, any advice on getting more team members on board? So how do we get others to join the party? Any concluding thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think you hope that by modeling or by doing these things, even if you're starting like a reading group and there's 2 or 3 people, right? As you start to do it and talk about the benefits of it or these types of things, or people become aware of it, I think that there's almost some of that intrinsic motivation for people to want to change. But again, I also think too, it's just really modeling that behavior, especially in this climate. We can't always convince people of other things or what they should be doing. And sometimes that gets us in trouble. So modeling the behavior and the benefits and the outcomes is one real concrete way. And then just, wear your heart on your sleeve and talk about why it's important to you, why you continue to do that. And, even if it might be a little more messy or hard or whatever, like, it's important work that we need to do that. And you hope that, it becomes contagious. The other thing I would say, and I know we're right up against time, is where is your key person in your leadership? Where is your person who you can convince in your leadership that they can start to talk at that level and convince other people where you don't have to, right? So find that key supporter and really get on board and on the same page with that person and have them deliver your message, because it's coming from a different place in the organization. Or maybe that's you and you're advocating at the leadership level and making sure that it's visible and you're keeping the conversation alive and all those things. So those would be 2 things that I would recommend.
Thank you for asking us to do this today. It's been a delight.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you both so very much. We will, I think it was okay with both Chris and Cinnamon to share contact information if anybody does have any follow-up questions for them. So thank you both so much.
All right, thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Too. So we have put the links to the next sessions in the chat. They start at 2:30, so take a quick break and we hope to see you in the first round of sessions this afternoon.